let's talk about checks. Let's talk about skill checks and attack checks, because it feels like checks are being much more streamlined lately. What do I mean by that? Well, the title of this video is Check Smecks. And I have different notes down here, but we're not getting into those. I'm going to write from the top of my head. We have what I grew up playing, which would have been Dungeons and Dragons, and you've got the most recent one obviously being 5th edition, now going into 2024, D&D 2024. And I played some Pathfinder early on, I guess 3rd edition. But the idea was checks were very complicated, right? You had difficulty ladders or levels, right? Meaning that what was considered an easy DC, a medium DC, a high DC, a legendary DC. You've got things like Fate and Cipher. Fate and Cipher have these ladders as well, right? Where it's like, what's considered what in terms of the degree of difficulty. And I, as the GM, have to know, is this a easy task, a medium task? Also, are they a low-level character doing an easy task, and does that matter, versus a high-level character doing an easy task? Is it different? And I can understand there's a lot of cognitive load there, but the nice thing about that is it adds a lot of nuance to your game. Technically, with the DCs changing, it adds a little bit of a, like, what's the nice thing about it, I guess? I guess the nice thing would be, depending on how you play at your table, if you as a GM tell the player what they need to get in order to survive, to make the check, there's a moment of, where it's like you say, this is a 20. This is a 20 DC, and now they're like, oh, can I get it? So maybe there's that little bit of anticipation that you're getting. Well, I didn't play a lot of other indie games until more recently. And recently I've played a campaign of Dragonbane. I've played a campaign of Shadow of the Weird Wizard. I've read a ton of games. Obviously, like Into the Odd probably fits in with Dragonbane, and now you have MCDM, right? Or I should say Draw Steel. I recently played a lot of Crown and Skull, and you could probably fit this in Dragonbane. I'm not saying it's under it, but it's like Into the Odd. The main thing being here, instead of having, for this category, this is just a roll under skill, right? This is roll under skill. So there's still a check that's being made, but it's based on what you are, right? It's based on your skill. Vagabond is in here too, where you're saying, you know what? Whatever your skill is, roll a d20 and you got to get under it or over it, depending on the game. And it's never going to change. Doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter if you're doing something easy or hard or medium. Like, who cares? Because the idea, I think, with a lot of these games now is we need to unweight the cognitive load, keep narrative moving, right? Like, I think that's the idea here. Right, so you now have this as your, whoa, that's big. We'll do that. Right, so now this is what's kind of happening. Shadow of the Weird Wizard, it's just a flat D10. So you still have the idea being that you have a D20 plus attribute. So that's similar to D&D and other games. But all you're trying to do is get greater than a 10. That's it, right? So you're doing that constantly, where it's just, you've got to, I cast a spell at the enemy makes a will check. They roll a d20 plus their will stat, or they're just trying to beat 10. Not my spell level, not my spell attribute or saving throw or anything. Nope, they just got to beat a d10, and either they're very willful or they're not. You are, now opposed rolls, there still exist. And the other thing it has in this game is a luck roll, which is just there's no attribute, right? It's just d20 greater than 10. So that's a coin toss, in essence. A little bit better. Draw Steel, for those that know, this is using power levels, right? Where, in essence, everything is a success, but how much of one? Same thing with Crown Skull. You could kind of say that Crown Skull does a couple different things, right? It has your skills But when it comes to combat, it's still everything's a success. It's just how well you do, right? So there's this idea that a lot of these games are moving away from difficulty ladders and the complexity, and they're almost saying check schmecks. Like, I just want to know if it succeeded or not. I want it to feel competent. Like, I want you to feel competent as a player, meaning that not every player has the same chance of success, right? That's getting into more like the game Quest, where Quest even goes farther, where it's just saying everyone rolls a d20, and these are the ranges of success. It doesn't matter what your class is, what you are, what your background, etc. So that's a little not too far, because it's a fun game. But for some people, that might be a little too far. But this is still trying to say, look, I just want you to roll, because we need to move. We need to keep moving this narrative. So it needs to be fast. You don't have to think. You don't have to look up anything. I as a GM, I don't want to think. I don't want to look up, what the statistical chances of this. And we want to move forward. But I want you to feel like you're competent. So I want you maybe a little better at this, you a little better at that, right? So this seems to be the trend, and this whole idea of check schmecks. Who cares? Who cares about the check? Let's get the narrative going. It's very interesting, right? I like the trend. I personally like the trend, and I think that you can still have a very fun, interesting design space with this sort of philosophy, right? With the idea of goals. Let's move down here. Whoop. Goals. Fast checks. No DCs. or single DC. Player variability. Or competency. Right? That's what this is about. And I think that it's doing a good job. And I've really enjoyed them. Now, do I think that there's some limitations in some of them? Yeah. Sometimes I feel like I want more nuance. Is that a problem with the game design? Not necessarily. Maybe that's the GMs, the way they narrate things, the way they talk through things thus far. And to be honest, I've been the GM a lot of times in those. And so maybe I feel like, there's sometimes I will say that pacing, this moves at a breakneck pace, right? When you have these quick checks, things happen fast. And so that means the GM has to be on their toes more, right? Because they got to make sure that narrative's moving. And I'll admit, there's some times where it's nice to get a little pause in the narrative, right? Where you're able to kind of like take a breath as the GM and think about what I'm going to do next in this story. And so sometimes when you have those extra little steps, that kind of gives you that space. But I think that one, a GM can get better at that, so they can get better at their pacing. And two, they can probably hand off some of that to the players. There's probably a lot more room to myself as a GM to do a little more shared storytelling and hand off a little bit more of the narration or a little bit more of the descriptions or whatever the case might be. And that might give me that little pacing break. But anyways, that's check schmecks. I think there's some interesting stuff here. I'm loving where game design is going these days. I'm enjoying it and I'm embracing it, and I can't wait to see what's next. And to be honest, I also still love this stuff. I just want to know, the question is, can you make this even faster, right? Because that's the thing, is it's speed and intuitiveness. So can you do this and make it still intuitive and fast? Absolutely. But it'd be interesting to see what people start doing more and more of.